My son looked me straight in the eye and told me I was too old and selfish to keep my mother's house. He said his wife's parents deserved it more than I did. When I just smiled and nodded, he had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Hello there, my beautiful souls watching Grandmother's Tales today. Your love and support fills my heart with so much joy. If you enjoy the stories I share with you, please hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. I love reading your comments, so please tell me what city you're watching from today. I might just give you a special shout-out in my next story. Today's wonderful shout-out goes to lovely Jane from Texas. Thank you for your kind words, dear heart. Now let me tell you exactly what happened when my son tried to give away something that wasn't his to give. I'm Elena, and at 75 years old I've learned that sometimes the quietest response carries the most power. People expect tears, arguments, screaming matches. But honey, I've discovered that a gentle smile can be more devastating than any storm. The house in question wasn't just any property. It was my childhood home, the place where my dear mother raised me with nothing but love and sacrifice. When she passed away 20 years ago, she left me that little 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, along with strict instructions written in her will. Elena, she had said during her final days, this house must stay in our family bloodline. Promise me you'll protect it like I protected you. I kept that promise, dear ones. I absolutely kept it. After inheriting the house, I spent years making it special. Not fancy or expensive, just safe and comfortable. I had a security company install what they called a smart home system about 10 years ago. It cost me most of my savings from working at the grocery store for 30 years. But something told me I'd need that protection someday. The system could control lights, locks, windows, even display messages on screens. Most of the time it stayed in sleep mode, but I could activate everything with my phone. I also worked with a lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez, to make sure the house was legally protected. We set up what he called a family trust, with very specific rules about who could live there and under what circumstances. The paperwork was complicated, but the message was simple. Nobody could give away my house without my written permission and a court order. My son David never bothered to read those legal documents. At 50 years old, he assumed he understood everything about our family's affairs without asking questions. That was his first mistake. David used to visit regularly with his wife Patricia and their 2 children, Emma and Jake. We'd have Sunday dinners, birthday parties, holiday celebrations. The kids loved exploring every corner of the old house, playing hide and seek in the rooms where I had played as a child. Those were precious times that I thought would last forever. But gradually, things started changing. Patricia began making comments about how outdated everything was, how the furniture was too old-fashioned for modern living. She'd walk through the rooms like she was already planning renovations, mentioning how much better the space could be used. David started asking strange questions about property taxes, maintenance costs, and whether I really needed such a big house for just one person. I should have seen the signs, but love makes us blind sometimes. I kept making excuses for their behavior because they were family. The conversation that changed everything happened on a cold Tuesday morning last month. David called and asked to meet me for coffee at Murphy's Cafe, the little place downtown where I used to take him for pancakes when he was small. I was so excited to spend time with my son, thinking maybe he wanted to plan something special for the upcoming holidays. But when I arrived, David's face was serious, almost cold. He barely touched his coffee, just sat there fidgeting with his napkin like he was working up courage for something big. Finally, he looked across the table and dropped the bomb that shattered my peaceful world. "Mom," he said, "Patricia's parents are having money troubles. Their apartment rent is going up next month, and they can't afford the increase. I nodded sympathetically, already thinking about ways our family could help them during difficult times. Then David said the words that still echo in my mind. "We've decided to let them move into your house. It's perfect for them. And honestly, you don't really use all that space anyway. They're good people who deserve a comfortable place to spend their retirement years." I felt like ice water had been poured through my veins. But I kept my voice calm and steady. "David, honey, that's my mother's house. That's where you learned to ride your bicycle, where we celebrated every Christmas morning, where your grandmother told you bedtime stories." He waved his hand dismissively, like my feelings were just obstacles to overcome. "Mom, let's be realistic here. You're getting older, and that house is too much work for you. Patricia's parents will take excellent care of it, and it solves everyone's problems." The way he said it, so casual, so final, like 20 years of my life there meant absolutely nothing. Like my mother's dying wishes were just old-fashioned nonsense. I sat there staring at this man who looked like my son, but sounded like a complete stranger. "Have you discussed this with Patricia's parents?" I asked quietly, though I already suspected the answer. "Of course," David said, and for the first time he looked a little uncomfortable. "They're very grateful. Patricia's mom is already planning how she'll arrange the furniture and set up her sewing room. They're really excited about the move. They had planned everything without asking me, made all the decisions, drawn all the blueprints, probably even set a moving date. In their minds, I was just an old woman who would quietly step aside and let them take whatever they wanted." I reached across the table and patted David's hand gently, just like I had when he was small and needed comfort. "If that's what you've decided, David, then I suppose that's what will happen." His face showed surprise, then relief, then something that might have been disappointment. I think a part of him expected me to fight back, to show some spirit, to give him a reason to feel guilty about his decision. But I had learned something important during my 75 years on this earth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. Sometimes silence speaks louder than screaming. Sometimes a gentle smile can accomplish what arguments never could. After coffee, I drove straight home and made 2 very important phone calls. The first was to Mr. Rodriguez, my lawyer, who had been waiting for this day ever since we set up the family trust 20 years ago. The second call was to TechSafe Security, the company that had installed my smart home system. I told them it was time to wake up all those sleeping systems we had installed so carefully. "Mrs. Martinez," the technician said, "are you sure you want to activate everything? Once we flip that switch, your house becomes Fort Knox." "I'm absolutely sure," I replied, thinking about David's confident smile at the cafe. It's time my family learned that some things are worth protecting. That evening, I sat in my favorite chair and thought about my mother's final words to me. "Elena, this house represents our family's strength and independence. Never let anyone convince you to give up what belongs to us." As I drifted off to sleep that night, I smiled peacefully. David had no idea what he had just started. Patricia's parents had no clue what they were walking into. And I was finally going to show my family that Grandma Elena had learned a few tricks during her long life. Tomorrow would bring phone calls, moving trucks, and shocked faces. But tonight I slept like a baby, knowing that sometimes the gentlest people pack the biggest surprises. My mother always said that real strength whispers while weakness shouts. David was about to learn exactly what she meant. The next morning I woke up with a strange sense of peace, while David was probably celebrating his victory over breakfast. I was remembering all the precious moments that house had given me throughout my life. I could still picture my mother, Rosa, standing in that tiny kitchen every Sunday morning, making fresh tortillas from scratch. The smell would fill the entire house, calling me from whatever corner I was hiding in as a shy little girl. She'd let me help roll the dough, my small hands making crooked circles that she'd gently reshape with infinite patience. "Mija," she'd say in her soft voice, "this kitchen has fed 3 generations of our family. Someday, you'll understand why that matters more than having fancy new appliances." I understood now, Mama. I understood completely. That same kitchen had witnessed my first attempts at cooking for David when he was little. I'd burned countless meals trying to recreate my mother's magic. But David never complained. He'd eat my disasters with a smile, telling me they tasted almost as good as Abuela Rosa's. The living room was where my mother had taught me to sew, where we'd spend winter evenings mending clothes and sharing stories about our ancestors, who had worked so hard to give us a better life. That old couch, the one Patricia called hideous, was where my mother had held me during thunderstorms, singing lullabies until I fell asleep. Every corner of that house held memories that money couldn't buy and legal documents couldn't protect. But sometimes, dear ones, memories need a little help from modern technology. My phone started ringing around noon. The caller ID showed Rodriguez Law Office. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 5 minutes later. Again, I ignored it. By the 3rd call, I could imagine Mr. Rodriguez pacing his office, probably wondering why his usually prompt client wasn't answering. Finally, I decided to call him back on my own terms. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. We need to send legal notifications to your son immediately. If he's planning to move people into your house without proper authorization, we can stop this before it starts." "Mr. Rodriguez," I said calmly, settling into my favorite chair, "I appreciate your concern, but I want you to hold off on sending those papers." There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "Elena, I don't understand. This is exactly what we prepared for when we set up the trust. We have all the legal ammunition we need to prevent this situation." "I know, and I'm grateful for all your preparation," I replied. "But I need you to wait until they actually try to enter the house. I need them to see the consequences of their actions with their own eyes." Mr. Rodriguez sighed deeply. "Elena, that's a risky approach. What if they damage the property trying to get in? What if the situation escalates? Trust me," I said firmly. "I have everything under control. Just be ready to arrive with the proper documentation once I call you. Can you do that for me?" "Of course," he agreed reluctantly. "But promise me you'll be careful. Family disputes can get ugly very quickly." If only he knew what David and Patricia were planning for Saturday. Speaking of which, I decided to take a little drive past David's house that afternoon. Not to spy, you understand. Just to see how the neighborhood was looking these days. Pure coincidence that I happened to drive by just as a large moving truck was parked in their driveway. I slowed down and watched as David and Patricia directed 2 movers who were loading furniture and boxes. An older couple I didn't recognize was supervising the process, pointing at various items and discussing placement arrangements. These had to be Patricia's parents, Roberto and Carmen. Roberto looked like a decent man, maybe in his late 60s with gray hair and work-worn hands. Carmen was a petite woman with kind eyes, wearing a flower print dress and sensible shoes. They looked like good people who had no idea their daughter and son-in-law were about to humiliate them. Patricia was practically glowing with excitement, clipboard in hand, checking off items as they were loaded. "Make sure you pack the china carefully," she called to the movers. "It's going to look perfect in the dining room at the house. My dining room. My mother's dining room. The room where 3 generations of women had served meals with love." David was helping carry a rocking chair that I recognized as probably belonging to Carmen. He looked confident, pleased with himself, like a man who had solved everyone's problems with one brilliant decision. He had no idea that his problems were just beginning. I drove home and spent the rest of Thursday afternoon looking through old photo albums, remembering happier times when my family understood the meaning of respect. But dwelling on sadness wouldn't solve anything. It was time to take action. Friday evening, I drove to my mother's house one last time before the confrontation. I had my key, of course, but more importantly, I had my phone with the TechSafe security app that would wake up all those sleeping systems. The house felt different as I walked through the familiar rooms. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it seemed like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for tomorrow's drama to unfold. I started in the living room, opening the app and selecting System Activation. One by one, I turned on cameras that had been dormant for months, motion sensors that had been quietly waiting, a door and window sensors that would alert me to any unauthorized entry attempts. The kitchen windows had special electrochromic glass that could turn opaque at the touch of a button. I tested it, watching the clear glass darken until it was impossible to see inside. Perfect. In the bedrooms, I activated the sound system that could play pre-recorded messages through hidden speakers. I'd recorded several messages earlier that week just in case David needed some education about legal property rights. The front door was equipped with an electronic lock that I could control remotely. No matter what key David thought he had, it wouldn't work once I changed the access codes from my phone. I saved the best for last. The security company had installed LED display panels on the inside of several windows, invisible when turned off but capable of displaying bright messages when activated. I programmed them with clear, simple words. Private property. No unauthorized access. Violators will be prosecuted. As I worked, I found myself talking to my mother's spirit, just like I had during the lonely evenings after she passed away. "Mama," I whispered to the empty rooms, "tomorrow they're going to learn what happens when people try to take what doesn't belong to them. I hope you approve of what I'm about to do." I could almost hear her voice responding. "Mija, sometimes you have to teach people respect the hard way. Your grandfather didn't work 3 jobs, so his descendants could give away our home to strangers." By 9 o'clock, everything was ready. Every system activated, every sensor armed, every display panel programmed. I did one final test, using my phone to lock and unlock doors, turn lights on and off, activate the window displays. Everything worked perfectly. As I locked the front door for the last time using my old key, I smiled thinking about tomorrow morning. David had told me the moving truck would arrive at 10 o'clock sharp. Patricia's parents were planning to spend their first night in their new home tomorrow evening. Instead, they were about to get the shock of their lives. I drove home feeling more confident than I had in weeks. David thought he was so smart, making plans behind my back, assuming his old mother would just quietly accept whatever he decided. Patricia probably thought she'd found the perfect solution to her parents' housing problem. None of them had any idea that Grandma Elena had spent 10 years and most of her life savings preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Tomorrow, my family was going to learn that respect isn't something you can just take from people. It's something you earn. And sometimes, dear ones, when people forget that lesson, you have to remind them in ways they'll never forget. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Perfect moving weather, as Patricia had mentioned on her social media posts the night before. She had no idea how memorable this day was about to become. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and watching the clock. At exactly 9:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the TechSafe security app. Motion detected at front entrance. I opened the live camera feed, and there they were. A large moving truck was backing into the driveway, followed by David's SUV and an older sedan that probably belonged to Roberto and Carmen. My heart started beating a little faster, but I felt surprisingly calm. Through the camera, I watched David jump out of his vehicle with the energy of a man who thought he was about to make everyone happy. Patricia emerged next, already directing the movers like she owned the place. Then came Roberto and Carmen, looking excited but a little nervous about their big day. The two grandchildren, Emma and Jake, ran toward the front door shouting, "We're here! We're at the new house." Their innocent joy made my chest tighten with sadness. They had no idea their parents had created this mess. I watched David confidently approach the front door, pulling out what he thought was the correct key. He'd probably made a copy from my old key years ago during one of his visits. Poor thing had no idea that electronic locks don't care about old-fashioned keys. He inserted the key and turned it. Nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling it and pushing harder. Still nothing. I could see his confident expression starting to change to confusion. "The lock must be stuck," I heard him call to Patricia through my hidden microphones. Maybe the weather affected it somehow. Patricia walked over, her clipboard still in hand. "Try the back door," she suggested. "We can get in that way and unlock the front door from inside." "Oh, honey," I thought to myself. That's not going to work either. I watched the little group walk around to the back of the house. David tried the back door key with the same results. By now, Roberto was offering to help, suggesting they call a locksmith. Carmen was starting to look worried. That's when David made his biggest mistake. He decided to force his way in. "Stand back, everyone," he announced, preparing to shoulder the door. "I'll just break it open. We can fix it later." The moment David's body hit the back door, every alarm in the house activated simultaneously. The sound was incredible. Sirens, bells, and buzzing alarms filled the air from multiple directions. It was so loud that I could hear it clearly from my house 6 blocks away. The children started crying immediately, covering their ears and running toward the car. But that was just the beginning of their surprise. All the windows in the house instantly turned dark gray, like someone had pulled curtains across them from the inside. The electrochromic glass made it impossible to see into any room, giving the house a strange, fortress-like appearance. Then the LED displays activated. Bright red letters appeared on the inside of the living room and kitchen windows. "Private property. No unauthorized access." Another window displayed, "Security breach detected. Authorities notified." A third showed, "Violators will be prosecuted to full extent of law." I could see David stumbling backward from the door, his face pale with shock. Patricia dropped her clipboard, her mouth hanging open as she stared at the transformed house. Roberto was trying to calm the crying children, while Carmen just stood there looking completely bewildered. "What the hell is happening?" David shouted over the alarms, though I could barely make out his words through the noise. The moving men had stopped unloading the truck and were standing at a safe distance, clearly wondering if they should just leave. Smart men. Through my cameras, I watched David frantically pulling out his phone to call me. I let it ring. He tried again. Ring, ring, ring. No answer. By the third call, he was practically screaming into the phone, but I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. The alarms had been going for about 10 minutes when I saw Mrs. Henderson from next door walking toward the commotion. She was followed by Mr. Chen from across the street and the young couple from the corner house. The whole neighborhood was coming out to see what was causing such a disturbance. That's when someone called the police. I was still watching through my phone when the patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers got out and immediately approached David, who was trying to explain the situation over the continuing alarms. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but I could see David gesturing frantically at the house, then pointing at the moving truck, then showing the officers his useless key. Patricia was nodding vigorously, probably trying to convince them that they had permission to be there. Poor Roberto and Carmen were standing by their car, looking like they wanted to disappear into the ground. The children were still crying, and the whole scene looked like complete chaos. That's when I decided it was time to make my grand entrance. I drove slowly down Maple Street, taking my time, enjoying the sight of the crowd that had gathered around my mother's house. The alarms were still wailing, the windows were still dark, and the LED messages were still flashing their warnings. As I parked behind the police car, I could see David's face transform from confusion to dread. He knew in that moment that his mother had outsmarted him completely. I stepped out of my car wearing my best dress and my brightest smile. In my purse was a folder containing all the legal documents that would end this nonsense once and for all. "Good morning, officers," I said pleasantly, walking toward the group like I was arriving for a Sunday picnic. "I believe there's been some sort of misunderstanding about my house." The look on David's face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. It was the exact moment he realized that his quiet, gentle mother had been playing chess while he was playing checkers, and the game was just getting started. The police officers were professional but clearly confused by the whole situation. Officer Martinez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, approached me with his notepad ready. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner?" he asked, gesturing toward the house where alarms were still wailing like banshees. "I am indeed," I replied, pulling out my driver's license and property deed. "This is my mother's house, which I inherited 20 years ago. I believe my son here has been making promises he had no legal right to make." David stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Mom, what is all this? What did you do to the house? Why won't our key work?" I smiled at him with the same gentle expression I'd used when he was 5 years old and got caught stealing cookies. "Oh, honey, you never had the right key. You see, I upgraded the security system about 10 years ago. Smart locks, cameras, motion sensors, the whole package." Patricia was staring at the darkened windows, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Martinez, we don't understand. David said this was our house now. My parents sold their furniture. They gave notice at their apartment. We have a moving truck." Before I could respond, another car pulled up behind mine. "Mr. Rodriguez stepped out, wearing his best suit and carrying a thick briefcase. Right behind him came Tony from TechSafe Security, equipment bag in hand. "Sorry I'm late, Elena," Mr. Rodriguez called out. "I came as soon as you texted me. I brought all the documentation we discussed." Officer Martinez looked between me and the lawyer. "Sir, are you representing Mrs. Martinez in this matter?" "I am," Mr. Rodriguez replied, opening his briefcase. "Mrs. Martinez contacted me because her son apparently promised to transfer this property to non-family members without her consent or legal authorization." That's when David's confident expression finally cracked completely. "Legal authorization? Mom, what's he talking about? This is family business, not some legal issue." Mr. Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder and handed copies to both police officers. "Officers, when Mrs. Martinez inherited this property, we established what's called a family trust with very specific protections. The house cannot be transferred, sold or occupied by non-family members without the trustees' written consent and proper court procedures." Officer Martinez scanned the documents while his partner, Officer Johnson, tried to calm the still-crying children. The alarms were making conversation difficult, so I decided it was time for a demonstration. "Tony," I called to the security technician, "would you mind showing everyone how this system works?" Tony grinned and pulled out a tablet. "Sure thing, Mrs. Martinez. Watch this, folks." He tapped the screen and instantly, every alarm in the house went silent. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the noise had been. "Now," I said, pulling out my own phone, "let me show you what 10 years of planning looks like." I opened the TechSafe app and tapped Window Display Mode. Immediately, the LED panels inside the windows changed their message to read, "Welcome to the Martinez family smart home. Unauthorized access denied." Patricia gasped. Carmen grabbed Roberto's arm. David just stared with his mouth open. "The windows can go clear again, too," I continued, tapping another button. The electrochromic glass slowly became transparent, revealing the familiar furniture inside. Or dark again. Tap. The windows darkened, all controlled from my phone. Officer Martinez was clearly impressed despite the family drama unfolding. "Ma'am, this is quite a security system. But can you prove you actually live here and have the right to control it?" "Of course," I replied, walking toward the front door. I opened my app and selected Door Unlock. The electronic lock clicked open immediately. "Would you like to see inside, officers?" As we walked through the front door, I could hear David behind me trying to explain to Roberto and Carmen. "Look, I'm sorry about this confusion. I didn't know about any legal restrictions." Roberto's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "David, you told us this was settled. You said your mother agreed. We trusted you completely. The inside of the house looked exactly as I'd left it. But now it felt different. It felt protected. Safe. Mine." I led the group into the living room where family photos covered the mantelpiece. "Officers, this house has been in my family for over 50 years. My mother, Rosa Martinez, left it to me with very clear instructions about keeping it in our bloodline." Mr. Rodriguez opened another folder. "Here's the original will, the property transfer documents, and the family trust paperwork. Everything has been properly filed with the county clerk's office." Officer Johnson was studying the legal documents while his partner examined my identification. "Mrs. Martinez, everything appears to be in order here." "Sir," he addressed David, "did you have any legal documentation giving you authority to make decisions about this property?" David's shoulders slumped in defeat. "No, officer. I just thought, since I'm her son, and she's getting older." "Son," I interrupted gently. "Thinking and having legal authority are two very different things. You promised these nice people something that was never yours to give." Carmen finally spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "David, do you have any idea what you've put us through? We sold our dining room set. We packed up 40 years of memories. We told all our friends we were moving to this beautiful house." Patricia was now glaring at her husband with undisguised fury. "David, how could you not check if this was legal? How could you make promises without being sure?" "I can show you more of what the house can do," I offered, trying to lighten the mood slightly. I pulled out my phone and tapped Interior Lighting Demo. Every light in the house began a gentle sequence, turning on and off in different rooms, creating patterns visible through the now clear windows. "Motion sensors in every room," I explained. "Door and window sensors. Even temperature controls I can adjust from anywhere," Tony added proudly. Mrs. Martinez was one of our first customers to go fully automated. She was thinking way ahead of her time. Roberto shook his head in amazement and frustration. All these years, David told us his mother was just a simple old lady who didn't understand modern technology. "I may be old," I replied with a smile, "but I'm not simple. And I definitely understand the importance of protecting what my mother worked so hard to leave me." Officer Martinez closed his notepad. "Well, folks, this appears to be a civil family matter, now that we've established Mrs. Martinez is the legal owner. Ma'am, do you want to press charges for attempted breaking and entering?" I looked at David, who was now sitting on my front steps with his head in his hands. Patricia was pacing back and forth, probably planning the argument they'd have later. Roberto and Carmen looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "No charges, officer," I decided. "This is my family, and we'll work this out ourselves. But I do appreciate you both coming to help sort things out." After the police left, an uncomfortable silence settled over our little group. The moving truck drivers were still waiting, probably wondering if they should start unloading or just leave. "David," I said softly, walking over to where he sat, "we need to have a serious conversation about respect, honesty, and what it means to be part of this family." He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the scared little boy he'd once been. "Mom, I messed up. I messed up really, really badly." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "But we're going to figure out how to fix this mess together. All of us. Because that's what families do, dear ones. Even when someone makes terrible mistakes, even when trust gets broken, even when people forget the values they were raised with, real families find a way to heal and move forward. But first, David was going to have to face the consequences of his choices. And those consequences were just getting started. The moving truck pulled away from Maple Street around noon, taking with it Roberto and Carmen's dreams of a peaceful retirement in my mother's house. I watched from my living room window as David tried to explain to the truck drivers why they needed to return all the furniture to storage instead of unloading it. The cost of that wasted moving day would be the least of his problems. Patricia hadn't spoken to David since the police officers left. She sat in their car with Emma and Jake, probably trying to figure out how to explain to two confused children why their promised adventure had turned into such a disaster. Every few minutes I could see her shaking her head and gesturing angrily, clearly having some very serious thoughts about her husband's decision-making skills. Roberto and Carmen climbed into their sedan, looking like they'd been hit by a truck. The excitement in their faces from this morning had been replaced by embarrassment and disappointment so deep it made my heart ache. These were good people who had trusted their son-in-law and ended up paying the price for his arrogance. Before they could drive away, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I walked out to their car and tapped gently on Carmen's window. She rolled it down, her eyes red from crying. "Mrs. Santos," I said softly, "I am so very sorry about what happened today. You and Roberto didn't deserve to be put in this position." Carmen wiped her eyes with a tissue. "Mrs. Martinez, we're the ones who should apologize. We had no idea David didn't have permission to offer us your house. If we had known—" "You couldn't have known," I interrupted. "David should have been honest with all of us from the beginning. But I want you to know that just because my son made a mistake doesn't mean I want your family to suffer." Roberto leaned forward from the driver's seat. "Ma'am, we appreciate your kindness, but we're in quite a mess now. We gave our landlord notice, sold some of our furniture, even put a deposit down on storage space for the rest of our things. My heart broke a little more, hearing about their practical losses. Roberto, Carmen, what if I told you I might be able to help you find a solution that works for everyone? Not my house," I added quickly, "but maybe something even better." Carmen's face showed the first spark of hope I'd seen since the alarm stopped. "What do you mean?" "Give me a week to make some phone calls," I said. "I know people in the senior housing community. There might be options we haven't considered yet. Would you be willing to let me try?" The relief in their faces was immediate. "Mrs. Martinez," Carmen said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "You are a very kind woman. Your son is lucky to have a mother like you, even if he doesn't realize it right now." After they drove away, I turned my attention to the remaining family drama unfolding in David's SUV. Through the windshield, I could see Patricia pointing at David while saying something that was making him shrink lower in his seat. The children were in the back, probably wondering why everyone was so upset. I walked over and knocked on David's window. He rolled it down reluctantly, looking like a man facing his execution. "Patricia," I said, leaning down to address my daughter-in-law, "I think you and I need to have a private conversation sometime soon. Not today because everyone's emotions are too raw, but maybe tomorrow evening." Patricia's anger seemed to deflate slightly. "Mrs. Martinez, I honestly don't know what to say. I'm so embarrassed about this whole situation. Embarrassment is a normal reaction when someone you trust makes poor decisions," I replied gently. "But embarrassment passes. Trust takes longer to rebuild." David winced at my words, which had clearly hit their target. "Can we talk later, Mom?" he asked quietly. "After I figure out how to explain all this to Emma and Jake?" "Of course, honey. Take your time." "But David," I waited until he met my eyes. "Next time you want to make decisions about my property, maybe ask me first, instead of assuming I'll just go along with whatever you decide." That evening, my phone rang constantly. First it was David, calling to apologize again and asking if we could meet for dinner somewhere private. Then it was Patricia, wanting to schedule that conversation I had mentioned. Even Roberto called to thank me for offering to help and to apologize once more for the confusion. But the call that surprised me most came around 8 o'clock from David's neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. "Elena?" she said when I answered. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the church directory. I just wanted to tell you that I think what happened today was completely justified." I was confused. "Mrs. Peterson, how do you know about today?" "Oh, honey. Patricia's been over here for the past 2 hours, crying on my porch and telling me the whole story. She needed somewhere to vent, and I guess she figured her neighbor was a safe person to talk to. This was interesting. What exactly did she tell you?" "She said David promised her parents your house without asking you first. She said you outsmarted all of them with some kind of high-tech security system. And she said she's starting to realize her husband has a problem with making promises he can't keep." Mrs. Peterson paused, then continued. "Elena, Patricia told me this isn't the first time David has gotten them into trouble by being overconfident about things he doesn't fully understand. Apparently, he once promised to loan money to her brother without checking their bank account first. Now I was getting a clearer picture of the problems in my son's marriage." "What else did she say?" "She said she's been pushing David to get more involved in family financial decisions. But now she realizes maybe she was pushing him toward things he wasn't equipped to handle. She feels terrible about her parents getting hurt. This conversation was giving me hope that Patricia might be more reasonable than I'd originally thought." "Mrs. Peterson, did Patricia seem angry at me for what happened today?" "Oh no, quite the opposite. She kept saying how impressed she was that you had planned ahead so carefully. She said she never realized how smart and prepared you were. I think she feels foolish for underestimating you." The next evening, Patricia arrived at my house carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of sincere regret. "Mrs. Martinez," she said as I opened the door, "I brought these as an apology. Not just for today, but for months of disrespectful behavior toward you." I invited her in and made coffee, curious to hear what she really thought about everything that had happened. "Patricia, tell me honestly, what did you think of me before yesterday?" I asked, settling into my favorite chair. She looked uncomfortable but answered truthfully. "I thought you were a sweet old lady who was maybe a little too attached to old things. I thought David was probably right when he said you didn't really need such a big house. I'm ashamed to admit I never considered how important that house was to you personally. And now?" Patricia smiled ruefully. "Now I realize you're one of the smartest, most prepared people I've ever met. That security system didn't just appear overnight. You planned for this kind of situation years ago, didn't you?" "I hoped I'd never need it," I replied honestly. "But my mother always taught me that hope for the best and prepare for the worst." "Mrs. Martinez, can I ask you something personal?" Patricia leaned forward. "How long have you been worried that someone might try to take advantage of you?" I thought about her question carefully. "Patricia, when you get to be my age, you start thinking about protecting the things that matter most. Not because you don't trust your family, but because you understand that people can make poor decisions when they're under pressure. Like David was under pressure from me to solve my parents' housing problem," she said quietly. "Exactly like that," I confirmed. "David loves you and wanted to help. But love doesn't automatically make someone an expert in real estate, law, or family property rights." Patricia was quiet for several minutes, sipping her coffee and staring out my kitchen window. "Mrs. Martinez, I owe you another apology. For the past year, I've been encouraging David to be more assertive about family decisions. I thought he was being too passive, letting you make choices that affected all of us. Now I realize I was pushing him to overstep boundaries he should have respected. This was exactly the kind of honest conversation I'd been hoping to have. Patricia, there's a difference between being involved in family decisions and making unilateral decisions about other people's property. David crossed that line, but you're right that the pressure you put on him contributed to the problem." She nodded sadly. "My parents are so disappointed in David and in me for encouraging this whole mess. They're staying in a hotel tonight because they can't go back to their old apartment." "Actually," I said, reaching for a notepad where I'd been jotting ideas, "I spent today making some phone calls about that. I think I may have found a solution that could work for everyone." Patricia's eyes lit up with cautious hope. "Really? There's a new senior living community about 15 minutes from here. Independent living, not assisted care. They have a beautiful 2-bedroom unit available next month. The monthly cost is actually less than most apartment rentals, and they include maintenance, security, and even a meal plan if your parents want it." "That sounds wonderful. But we already know they can't afford the deposit and moving expenses after losing money on this disaster." I smiled. "Patricia, what if I told you that I've been looking for a way to help worthy people in our community? I have some money set aside for exactly these kinds of situations." "Mrs. Martinez, I don't understand. I'm offering to help your parents with the deposit and moving costs. Not as charity, but as an investment in our family's future relationship. Your parents seem like good people who got caught in the middle of their children's poor communication." Patricia started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Why would you help us after what we put you through?" "Because, Patricia, that's what families do when they want to build something better together." 3 weeks passed before David knocked on my door with the humility I'd been waiting to see since he was a teenager who'd crashed his first car. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need to have an honest conversation with you about what kind of man I've become." I invited him in and made his coffee exactly the way he'd liked it as a child. Extra cream, 2 sugars. We sat at my kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework for 12 years, where we'd had heart-to-heart talks about bullies and girlfriends and dreams for the future. "I called Roberto and Carmen yesterday," David began, his voice shaking slightly. "I apologized for the 3rd time, but more importantly, I thanked them for not pressing charges or making this worse than it already was." "How are they settling into their new place?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They love it, Mom. Patricia and I visited them last weekend, and Carmen gave us a tour of their apartment. She's already made friends with 3 neighbors, and Roberto joined the community workshop where he's building birdhouses. I felt a warm satisfaction knowing my phone calls had helped connect them with Sunset Manor. The senior community had been perfect for them. Independent but secure, affordable but dignified. "David, what have you learned from all this?" I asked directly. He took a deep breath before answering. "I learned that being a man doesn't mean making decisions for other people without asking them first. I learned that confidence and competence are 2 completely different things. And I learned that my mother is a lot smarter and stronger than I ever gave her credit for. What else? I learned that Patricia was right to push me to be more involved in family decisions. But she was wrong about what that involvement should look like. Being involved means asking questions, doing research, having conversations. It doesn't mean just taking charge and assuming everyone else will adapt." This was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. "How are things between you and Patricia now?" David's face brightened for the first time during our conversation. "Actually, Mom," They're better than they've been in years. That disaster forced us to have some very honest conversations about communication, trust, and making decisions together instead of just reacting to pressure. And the children. How did you explain what happened that Saturday? We told them the truth, in kid-friendly terms. We explained that Daddy made a promise he couldn't keep, because he didn't ask Grandma Elena first. Emma said that sounded like when she promises her friend she can borrow a toy that actually belongs to Jake. I laughed, remembering how clearly children can see adult foolishness sometimes. Mom, there's something else, David continued. Patricia and I want to establish some new family rules going forward. We want to ask your permission before making any plans that involve you or your property. We want to have regular family meetings where everyone gets to share their thoughts before big decisions get made. That sounds very mature, David. And we want to learn more about the family history that you've been trying to preserve. Patricia realizes she never asked you about your mother, about how you grew up, about why that house means so much to you. 2 days later, Patricia arrived with Emma and Jake for what she called Grandma's special house tour. I'd spent the morning preparing demonstrations that would amaze the children without scaring them. Kids, I announced as we approached the front door, your great-grandmother's house has some very special secrets that I'm going to share with you today. I pulled out my phone and activated the entry sequence. The front door lock clicked open with a satisfying sound that made both children gasp with delight. Grandma Elena, how did you do that? Emma asked, her 8-year-old eyes wide with wonder. Magic, I replied with a wink, then showed her the app on my phone. Actually, it's technology magic. Watch this. I tapped the lighting control, and every light in the house began a gentle dance, creating patterns that moved from room to room like a rainbow chasing itself through the windows. Jake, who was 10 and thought he knew everything about technology, was completely enchanted. Grandma, can you make the windows change colors too? I demonstrated the electrochromic glass, darkening and clearing the windows while explaining how the technology worked, in terms they could understand. It's like sunglasses for the house, I told them. Can we see the messages on the windows again? Emma asked, remembering the LED displays from that dramatic Saturday. Sure, but this time let's make them say something fun. I reprogrammed the displays to read, "Welcome Emma and Jake to the coolest house on Maple Street." Both children squealed with joy and ran outside to see their names glowing in the windows. Patricia watched with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Martinez, you've turned what could have been a scary memory into something magical for them. Patricia, call me Elena. We're family, and families should use first names when they're building new relationships. Over the next hour, I showed the children how the motion sensors could turn lights on automatically when they walked into rooms, how the security cameras let me see who was at the door from anywhere in the house, and how I could control the temperature in each room separately. This is like living in a spaceship, Jake declared, which made me laugh until my sides hurt. Jake, this technology isn't just for fun, I explained. It helps keep me safe, protects the house from people who might want to hurt it, and lets me share my home with people I love without worrying about security. Emma, who was always the more thoughtful of my grandchildren, asked a question that touched my heart. Grandma Elena, will you teach me how to use the magic house so I can take care of it someday? Emma, honey, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. That evening, after the children had gone home buzzing with excitement about their grandmother's magic house, Patricia lingered for a cup of tea. Elena, I owe you more than apologies, she said seriously. I owe you recognition for being an incredible woman who I completely misunderstood. Patricia, we all make assumptions about people based on limited information. The important thing is being willing to learn and change. David told me about the conversation you had with him last week, about respect being earned, not taken. What did you think about that? I realize that I've been taking your kindness for granted, too. You've always been welcoming to me, always included me in family decisions when you didn't have to, always treated my children like precious treasures. I responded by assuming you were just a nice old lady who would go along with whatever we wanted. Patricia paused, staring into her teacup. Elena, will you tell me about your mother? About what it was like growing up in that house? I want to understand why preserving it matters so much to you. For the next 2 hours, I shared stories about my mother, Rosa, that I hadn't told anyone in years. I told Patricia about the Saturday mornings when Mama would braid my hair while telling me stories about our ancestors, who had worked so hard to give us a better life. I described the winter evenings when we'd sit by the fireplace, Mama teaching me to sew, while sharing wisdom about strength, independence, and the importance of protecting what belongs to our family. Elena, your mother sounds like an amazing woman. She was. And Patricia, she would have loved knowing that her great-grandchildren were learning about technology and family history in the house she worked so hard to provide for us. Or will you teach me the stories so I can pass them on to Emma and Jake? I would be honored to do that. As we said goodbye that evening, Patricia hugged me tighter than she ever had before. Elena, thank you for not giving up on our family, even when we didn't deserve your patience. Patricia, families don't work perfectly. They work through problems together, with love and respect and sometimes a little bit of technology magic. The next Sunday, our whole family gathered at my house for dinner. David, Patricia, Emma, Jake, and even Roberto and Carmen joined us for what Patricia had started calling Sunday Supper at the Magic House. As we sat around my mother's dining room table, sharing food and laughter and stories about our week, I felt my mama's presence so strongly. This was what she had dreamed of when she worked those long hours to keep our house in the family. Not just a building, but a gathering place where love could grow and traditions could continue. Elena, Roberto said during dessert, Carmen and I want you to know that what started as the worst day we'd had in years turned into one of the best things that ever happened to our family. How so, Roberto? Because it taught all of us, including David and Patricia, that real family relationships are built on honesty, respect, and communication. We've had more genuine conversations in the past 3 weeks than we had in the previous 3 years. Carmen nodded enthusiastically. And Elena, your kindness in helping us find our new home showed us what real family generosity looks like. Not taking from others, but finding ways to lift everyone up together. As the evening wound down and families prepared to leave, Emma tugged on my sleeve. Grandma Elena, when I grow up and have children, will you teach them about the Magic House too? Emma, sweetheart, by the time you have children, I'll probably be watching over this house from heaven, just like my mama does now. But I promise you'll know all the stories and all the technology so you can teach them yourself. Will I be the guardian of the house like you are? I knelt down to look into her serious 8-year-old eyes. Emma being the guardian of something precious isn't about age or ownership. It's about understanding why it matters and being willing to protect it with wisdom and love. Dear ones watching grandmother's tales today, that little girl understood something that took the adults in our family much longer to learn. Real strength isn't about taking control or making demands. Real strength is about building bridges, setting boundaries with love, and protecting what matters most, while still finding ways to include and uplift everyone around you. Sometimes technology can be a tool for protection. Sometimes legal documents can preserve what's precious. But most importantly, sometimes the gentlest response can teach the strongest lessons. Thank you for joining me on this journey about family, respect, and the power of preparation. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for more stories about the wisdom that comes with age and the magic that happens when families learn to truly communicate. Until next time, remember that love without boundaries isn't really love. It's enabling. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people you love is to show them the consequences of their choices. Your support means everything to this old grandmother's heart. Keep sharing your own stories in the comments below. We're all learning together.